Hello and welcome back to the I Just Love Footy YouTube channel, and we're just days away from the opening round starting with Melbourne and Sydney. So what better way to get things rolling this week than to do an analysis and a preview of the games that we have coming up. Firstly, looking at Melbourne versus Sydney, I'm just going to get straight into it, and for Melbourne to win, they're going to have to take marks inside 50. The narrative last year was pretty much revolving around the point that Melbourne can't kick going inside 50. The forwards have no synergy with the mids have no connections with the forwards. That will be the biggest question needing answering on Thursday night against the Sydney Swans. Now for Melbourne, who last season had the most inside 50s per game, were unable to turn them into scores and were very poor in that realm. They need to be averaging 15 marks inside 50 if they're getting 58, 60 inside 50s per game like they did last season. And for a Geelong side last season who averaged 53 inside 50s, which put them in the middle of the pack, they ended up being the number one side for marks inside 50. Now I know they've got Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron, but that suggests that their game style does give them opportunities to take marks inside 50. So with the acquisitions of Jack Billings and Christian Salem playing in the midfield, I think that is going to be the big focal point for Melbourne. They're going to need a fair contribution from Van Rooyen, Bailey Fritsch, Max Gawn and Shaki. They all had an impact in their practice match against Carlton, so look for more of that while they rue the absences of Harris and Petty. Another key stat that I'll be keeping a close eye on Thursday is the contested possession count. Now for Sydney, they're not going to have Taylor Adams, they're not going to have Luke Parker, they're not going to have Callum Mills, and between them three, they averaged 25 contested possessions per game as a trio last season. Now obviously Taylor Adams was at Collingwood, but I think it's still a relevant point to state. That is a big concern, the fact that they're going to be missing when they're versing one of the premier sides when it comes to contested possessions, and very experienced, big-bodied midfielders in Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca and Jack Viney. Sydney's coaching panel are pretty much asking for 4 players under the age of 22 to do a job or break even against that Melbourne midfield side. They've got Warner, Goulden, Rowbottom and Angus Sheldrick coming up. And I don't think Isaac Heaney can go through there too much. They will need him forward, and we'll talk about the forward third shortly. But I think that's going to be a real advantage to Melbourne on Thursday, and I think that's ultimately, along with the marks going inside 50, that's going to tell the tale of how this game pans out. Moving into the forward line, as far as the key position order is concerned, you've got May, Lever and Tomlinson up against McLean, Amati and Logan McDonald. This game's really setting a landscape for the old dogs versus the young bulls, but these old dogs are still very relevant and still at the peak of their powers and pushing for another premier tilt this season. So I think May shuts down Logan McDonald if they do have an opportunity to lock horns, and then Tomlinson and Lever also to do a job on Amati and McLean. I don't think Sydney are going to be scoring too much, and they're going to have to rely more so on their medium to smaller forwards in Papley and Isaac Heaney. Lastly, as far as matchups are concerned, as I mentioned, I'm looking forward to May versus Logan McDonald, Van Rooyen versus Tom McCartan, and then as a group, I'm really looking forward to the young bulls in the midfield for the Swans versus the experienced D's for Melbourne. I've got Melbourne winning by 27 points, but I think that's more of a floor rather than a ceiling. I think the ceiling could be much higher than 27 points against the Swans. On Friday night, we have Brisbane versus Carlton at the Gabba. Now, admittedly, for Carlton, Brisbane are a bit of a bogey team. Brisbane are 12-2 against Carlton since 2015.
Now, I know you Carlton faithful are going to say, well, Carlton have only been good for the last couple of seasons.
Well, 5-0 against Brisbane in their most recent encounters as well. A bogey team for Carlton, and obviously the team they lost against in the prelim final. Going into 2024, Brisbane are the best kicking side in the league, top 4 for efficiency going inside 50, and the best clearance side in 2023. Carlton are going to have to try their best to equalise some of those stats, as the pure weight of numbers in clearances in that prelim final ended up being the reason why Carlton lost against Brisbane. Meanwhile, also being beaten at their own game in contested possessions against Brisbane, where they're just a middle of the pack team. It's important to know that Carlton will be missing some integral players to their structure in Jacob Wiedering and then Sam Walsh in the middle, and even Jack Martin in the forward line. As I mentioned earlier, centre clearances is going to illustrate a lot of the story that we see unfold on Friday night. Carlton 15th for centre clearances versus Brisbane's first, and if you know the Gabba, you want to be winning those centre clearances and locking that ball into the forward half. I think this type of matchup at the type of ground they're playing at really suits Brisbane's favour, and we know how much of a fortress the Gabba has been for Brisbane recently. As far as matchups are concerned, I'm looking forward to Joe Danaher and Eric Hipwood taking advantage of the Blues blemishes in the backline, seeing who they match up on. Is it a Lewis Young, a Marchbank? I'm not too sure who else there could be at this point, so please let me know if I'm missing anyone. Brody Kemp as well, but I don't know if he's much of a one-on-one player, more of an intercept player, and probably too undersized for those two key tools. Conversely, on the other end, I'm interested to see if Mackay can take advantage of the second key tool defender for Brisbane in Jackson Payne. Seeing as Darcy Gardner has now moved forward, let's see if Mackay can take advantage of someone who's only 6'4", while Mackay stands at 6'6", and then Charlie Curnow is going to occupy Harris Andrews. So I'm intrigued because I want to see if Harris Andrews actually starts on Mackay or if he rotates through both of them depending on how they're both going. Seeing as far as height's concerned, Harris Andrews is probably a better suited matchup to nullify Mackay's impact, and then Jack Payne on Curnow, seeing as Curnow is only 6'4". But we'll see how that pans out as the game goes on. I'm going to make a bold call on this one, and Carlton fans aren't going to like it, but I'm going to go Brisbane by 54 points. Hey, just quickly, if you're really enjoying me deep diving into the analysis of these matchups, please consider subscribing. Roughly only 20% of you guys watching my videos are subscribed, so please consider that if you do like the content. Moving on to a big Saturday of footy where I will be barely leaving the couch. Gold Coast versus Richmond to start off at Metricon Stadium. Gold Coast were uninspiring to say the least in the two practice matches they played. They may have lost a couple of fans around the AFL world, and I'm one of them at the moment. I know they're only practice matches, but a new coach with a new precedent being set by the board, I think we just were hoping for a bit more from Gold Coast in the pre-season game. I do think this is going to be a messy game. It's the first game. It's Dimmer versus Uze, so both teams will want to get one up on each other very early in this new rivalry, if you will. And they're both relatively poor kicking teams according to AFL standards, so don't expect there to be too much polish in this game just yet. For Gold Coast, they're going to need players to stand up with Tuke Miller this season. Noah Anderson needs to take it to another level. Matty Rao needs to develop his outside game. Bailey Humphries has to get involved, and I think the intangible is that mental fortitude and being consistent and having resilience and being able to perform outside of Gold Coast. And what better team to set that precedent against a former dynasty team in Richmond, who in their own respect are looking to prove a lot of pundits wrong this season, most of them having Richmond in the bottom four. Look, I think Gold Coast do have a pretty list, and as Damien Hardwick alluded to earlier, he thinks he's got a premiership list, and maybe I don't have any qualms with that, but now they've got to prove that for real in 2024. They've got all the draft selections, they've got players entering their prime. Ben King, can he go another level? Jack Lukosius, can we find some consistency in him finally? On the other end, I'm expecting a statement game from Thompson Dow. He's really going to announce himself early this AFL season as a bona fide mid, being one of the youngsters coming up for Richmond. And Dusty Martin has to be fit and healthy and firing in the middle. Richmond need his polish going inside 50, and he's had a really unbothered, uninterrupted pre-season. So I think we're going to see the Dusty of old in spurts hopefully this season. I'm going to go with Richmond by 9 points in a sloppy affair. The last game for opening round is
Orange team
versus Collingwood, a modern day rivalry thanks to some heated final series encounters over the last few years. So a lot of passion and heart in these games. GWS will really want this one back. It's going to be a high octane game, and GWS are not a team you want to take lightly, or you don't want to have an off night against a GWS team. GWS are arguably the best pressure team in the league. They are best for tackles inside 50, spoils, top 4 for pressure acts and ground ball gets, while also both sides rank top 8 for tackles, and Collingwood in their own respect are also a great pressure team. However, I would suggest that GWS's linchpin of their game is their pressure for the most part, sprinkled with a little bit of Tom and Toby Green on top of all that pressure. As always, Collingwood will probably rely on their experience in close games, their ability to move the ball from one end to the other, being an elite team in scoring in general play. The defence will continue to do what they do with Darcy Moore more Jeremy Howe, Billy Frampton now, and Braden Maynard, so expect to see more of the same there. Isaac Quaynor as well. Can AJ find some consistency and add an extra dynamic to Collingwood's forward line? Ultimately, this game will be about who can overcome and endure the pressure the earliest, and who's going to set the bar. Is it going to be GWS coming out? Is it going to be Collingwood? I think Collingwood probably need to be mindful of their contested possession game. Can Nick Dacos and Jordan De Goey add a couple contested possessions in these games? I've got some enthralling matchups that we should all keep an eye on throughout this game. You have Braden Maynard versus Toby Green, and if that doesn't eventuate, then you're probably going to see an Isaac Quaynor versus Toby Green, and that's the one that really gets me going, and I'd love to see who wins that battle. Toby Green usually has it over every defender he ever plays against, but I think Isaac Quaynor might be a thorn in Toby Green's side moving forward. In the middle, Tom Green versus Jordan De Goey. I think whoever wins that matchup might have a damning say on who ends up winning the game. As I said, contested possessions are going to be a big conversation for this game. The last matchup for the game, I'm looking at Lachie Schultz versus Connor Iden, or Connor Iden versus Bobby Hill. And I'm sure that Iden will get looks at a lot of these players in Collingwood's forward line, because then you got McCreary and Elliott as well. But for the most part, I really want to see a Lachie Schultz versus a Connor Iden. Lachie Schultz coming over from Fremantle, great pressure player, can score, can find the ball. Connor Iden, a premier medium-sized defender, can play short or tall. So while I think everybody can appreciate the defender that Iden is, I don't think he got the raps he deserved last season, and expect him to make a name for himself in the AFL this season. Look away, Pies fans, because it's another close game, and I've got Collingwood winning by 4 points. So more heart attacks this year for Collingwood. Are we going over 10.5 heart attacks or under 10.5 heart attacks for Collingwood this season? You guys let me know in the comment section. Also, if you're wondering where I have these teams that I've mentioned today as far as their ladder positioning and predictions regarding that, and then also the club's pass marks from their perspectives, then have a look at these couple videos that I've made over the last month.